achieved.
To say the least, it is disappointing when a rule is not followed and it takes money directly out of your pocket. Now, what I'm referring to is the Travis Browne Fabricio Werdum opening round when Werdum hit Browne's hand with a punch. It ultimately broke Browne's finger, and there are pictures floating around now of a bone protruding from the finger. But besides that, if Browne had just fought through it, whatever. The fact is, Browne basically waved and said, oh, I'm injured, timeout, hold on. And the referee moved in. Basically, the official allowed Travis Browne to call a timeout, and then allowed him to continue fighting after an injury. That's no different than getting kicked in the body and breaking a rib and having to stop, getting punched in the head, losing consciousness and having to stop, taking leg kicks and unable to continue, unable to stand and unable to fight. It's all the same. And the reason I'm so sore about it is because that was the final leg in my wild card parlay. I had a massive parlay of Brad Tavares to win by decision, Jessica Andrade, Jojo Calderwood not to go to decision, and Mickey Gall by submission, and then Werdum Browne under 2.5 rounds. I thought it was in the bank at that point. Obviously, had they actually looked at in between rounds a little more thoroughly, they would have seen the bone sticking out. The fight would have been stopped then. That really makes me mad. That was one of 3 parlays that I lost by 1 leg. I also had a very solid silver parlay that paid well that I lost by 1 leg, and my gold parlay, which was Miocic, Jessica Andrade, and Jessica I, who lost a split decision. So basically, not following of a rule, a referee making a terrible mistake, that had it been Big John or anybody else, they probably stopped the fight, and of course the split decision costing us a lot of money. But that's the way MMA goes. We got to roll with it. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we are breaking down the upcoming UFC Fight Night 94, which will take place on September 17th. There are 6 fights on the main card, and I'll be giving you predictions for all of those fights momentarily. All of my preliminary picks will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net, where I will break them all down for you. I will also be posting my bet packs for this event as well. And one thing with the bet packs, the DraftKings, they produced. I put my lineups in 4 different contests, and I cashed. I think I doubled my money for in the contest that I invested in the contest. That was a nice part of it. But yeah, it was just very frustrating not to have the parlays hit, because I've had a lot of parlays lately. I've won a couple parlays here and there, but nothing massive. And again, I'm not one of those guys who's going to throw 2 out there at you and throw a massive favorite and then a semi-massive favorite and say double these up. A lot of people like, if you have big money to invest and you have no problem putting $150 or $500 or $1,000 down on a 2-fight parlay like that, and want to, not double your money, but get a sizable return back. I guess not in proportion to what you're actually betting. But the fact of the matter is, I like to make bets that have big returns. All right, that take some risk and put money back in your pocket. I'm not a bullshit artist who's going to come up with crap. I know I'm going to lose, but I'm also going to win, and that's why a lot of people stick with it. That's why my bet pack sales are going through the roof since I started, pushing the issues and not taking the safe route, because when I do win, it is big, and we're hoping to turn it around with this card. There's a lot of really good-looking odds on this card, a lot of tough fights to call, and without further ado, let's get to that first main card prediction. The main card opens up in the UFC's featherweight division as Chaz the Scrapper Skelly, 15-2-0, takes on Venezuela's Maximo Blanco with a current record of 12 wins, 7 losses, 1 draw, and 1 no contest. Now, Skelly is coming off his first UFC loss since his UFC debut, which he also was defeated in. He had won 4 in a row, was building some nice momentum. For Blanco, he's also coming off a defeat. He was submitted by Luke Sanders. He had won 3 in a row. Overall, he is 4-4 inside the octagon. Skelly, the American, is 3 inches taller. He'll have a 1-inch reach advantage, and he is 2 years younger. Now, looking at what they've done inside the cage over their careers, Blanco has 8 wins by knockout, but he's a concerning 0-3 in fights ended by submission, and concerning if you know what Skelly brings to the table. And Blanco's 4-2 in the scorecards. For Chaz Skelly, just 3 wins by knockout. Jim Allers was a pretty impressive stoppage, though. He has 8 victories by submission. He's never been tapped out, so he's very capable on the ground as far as his offensive grappling is concerned. And he is 4-2 on the scorecards. Now, Skelly is an NAIA All-American wrestler. He builds his attack around his wrestling and his submission grappling. He's had mixed results with his takedowns and his wins and losses. Obviously more effective in his wins for the most part and not nearly as effective in his losses. He is a smothering top position player. He likes to go for chokes. He also likes to attack legs. We saw that in both the Jim Allers fight and the Darren Elkins fight. He will give up position for submission, which isn't always advisable, but if he, it can lead to, a successful finish. When he fought Souza and they got to that, he eventually worked his way to Souza's back for the rear naked choke and showed his prowess in that situation. But again, he struggled to land takedowns with consistency. And at times, he will work a single leg, drive his opponent into the cage where he does a lot of his work and look to drag him to the ground. But at times, he will force his techniques and it can have a negative impact on his gas tank. And that certainly in longer fights can be detrimental to your ability to fight in rounds 2 and 3. When he fought Jim Allers, he had a lot of success pinning him on the cage and unloading with shots, especially the right hand, which he eventually put him down with. He'll also land short elbows. He'll pull back and jab, land an uppercut on the inside, and just constant barrages of strikes when he gets his opponent pinned. Now, at the same time, his chin's a little bit questionable, so is his head movement. He doesn't tend to use a lot of head movement. He was dropped by a big left hook from Souza, nearly knocked out in that fight. He doesn't land a ton of strikes. I believe his strikes landed per minute is under 2. It's probably improving a little bit. But in that fight against Souza, he was on his back getting pounded on after getting dropped at one point, and that was not, it's not a place he wants to be. We saw that against Darren Elkins as well. Now for Maximo Blanco, he's very aggressive. He's also very bizarre. He's done some really odd things in the cage. Really, you question his fight IQ at sometimes. He comes from a wrestling background. He showed pretty good scrambling skills. Overall in his UFC career, he's won the takedown battle by a count of 11-3. In addition to his wrestling, he's very dangerous on the feet. He throws a nice hard uppercut, a stiff jab. In his win over Daniel Hooker, he landed 132 significant strikes, but his output at times tends to drop off as the fights progress. He attacks in bursts. We saw it against Felipe Arantes. He lands a good body kick. He'll work uppercuts in flurries, followed by takedowns. He will set them up with his strikes at time. But again, when he fought Arantes, his chin didn't hold up. He got dropped a couple of times. That's certainly concerning for a guy who's willing to take a shot to land one. Same thing when he fought Luke Sanders. He was trading with Luke Sanders. He dropped Sanders early on. He worked himself into position. He almost set up an arm triangle to finish that fight, and things were looking very good, especially I had Blanco. But then he turned around. He got dropped with a left hook. He got submitted in that fight. As his chin seems to be growing, there are some concerns with it, despite the fact of actual knockout defeats. There are some cracks beginning to show up. Neither one of these guys are known for being cardio horses. Skelly is going to slow down, but I think he's very aggressive. He can crack, and I think he has the ability to take a punch a little bit better than Maximo Blanco at this point in his career. Additionally, Skelly has that aggressive wrestling. I know Blanco's a very good wrestler, but I think Skelly has a little bit of a better wrestling game, and his submission offense can be more effective, especially in simply pushing Blanco and getting him to wear down. I think Blanco leaves too many openings defensively when he's aggressive. Again, as he starts to slow down, it becomes worse. Look for Skelly to score a knockdown at some point, maybe stick that right hand in there, maybe catch him with a flurry along the cage, landing an uppercut, and eventually Skelly maybe works his way to the back and locks in that fight-ending rear naked choke. My prediction is Chaz Skelly to defeat Maximo Blanco by submission. Fight number 2 in the main card is also a very closely lined fight. We are in the lightweight division as Chris Wade, 11-2, takes on Russia's Islam Makhachev with a current record of 12 wins and 1 loss. Now, both of them are coming off their first loss inside the UFC. Actually, for Makhachev, I believe it is his first career loss ever. Wade had won 4 in a row coming into that matchup. For Makhachev, he won his debut before getting violently knocked out by Adriano Martins, an upset that I predicted and pretty much saw it playing out exactly the way it did. For Islam, he's also coming into this fight off an 11-month layoff. Wade has fought twice already this year. Makhachev was pulled from a matchup with Drew Dober earlier in 2016 after, I can't remember, was it dopamine? I can't remember whatever drug it was that he got caught, or they were in the system, so they red flagged him. Not a point. Moving on from that. Physically, both men are 5'10", 70-inch reach advantage. The Russian is the younger man by 4 years. Now, for Wade, I almost said Dwayne Wade. For Wade, he is a former NCAA Division II wrestler, BJJ blue belt. He has 4 submission wins, 7-2 on the scorecards. Never knocked anyone out in his pro career. Makhachev, international master of sport in Sambo, 2-1 in fights ended by knockout, 6-0 in fights ended by submission, 4-0 in the scorecards, and he trains with Khabib Nurmagomedov, which is definitely worth mentioning. As you can probably see when Makhachev fights, a lot of similarities that he has with the current one of the top title challengers in the lightweight division. Now, Makhachev, he has a very solid wrestling game, very solid takedown game. He uses a nice variety, throws, trips. He will shoot both single and double leg. We saw him execute a beautiful throw against Leo Kuntz, put him on the back, and immediately moved to back mount, where he started looking for that submission to finish the fight. He has good top position strikes, a very aggressive transition game. At times, Kuntz was able to take advantage of that and pop back up, but still, it's effective when he's attacking on the mat. If Makhachev opts to clinch and doesn't go for the takedowns, he'll land some elbows on the inside, really control his head, and pull his opponent down into uppercuts. He has some power when striking at distance, but he tends to be a little bit wide with his strikes, and that was my ultimate reason for picking Martins by knockout in that fight. Makhachev's aggressive, but he comes in wide with his punches. He'll throw a big overhand right, a wide-ranging left hook. He'll work to the body as well, mix in some head kicks. He dropped Kuntz with a nice counter strike as well in that matchup. He does a decent job of moving away when under attack, but then he tends to leave his chin up both when attacking and moving away. And he had trouble closing the distance and really finding his range against Martins. I don't know if he was cautious about getting in there with the power, or just was, wasn't able to, find his range just because he didn't get a chance to move in and the fight was over before he really opened up. He was pushing the pace early against the Brazilian, trying to swarm him with punches and moving forward. He got clocked with a big left hand. After he threw a left hand, he got caught with a counter. Now, Wade comes into this matchup. He has been leaned heavily on his takedown game for his success in the UFC. 3.25 takedowns per fight at a pretty solid 57% completion rate. He has a 70% takedown defense, but we really haven't seen a ton of guys shooting on Wade until Rustam Khabilov took him down 6 times, and Wade was unable to take him down at all. Prior to that, Wade had won the takedown battle 11-0 in his UFC run. Wade will shoot from the outside. He will also land some clinch-based takedowns. He saw against Giagos, he landed a very nice throw from the clinch. So similar to his opponent, he has more than one option where he can get the fight to the mat. Now, if they are at range, he's not a high-volume striker. He will kick from the outside. He does come from a bit of a kickboxing background. He'll work in a nice body and inside leg kick are his primary weapons. He did drop Khabilov with a beautifully executed jumping switch kick, but it was kind of crazy. He landed it, and then he jumped on him on the mat and immediately lost position. And we'll talk about that momentarily. He'll also mix in a spinning elbow. We've seen him throw it a couple of times, and he's not afraid to go there, but it's kind of like, bland, very simplistic striking or basic striking, then boom, something, jumping switch kick to the face, spinning elbow out of nowhere, which can be effective. It can catch guys off guard. Defensively, he does a good job of limiting his opponents. He'd never been hit more than 30 times for the Khabilov fight, where he got cracked. I think it was about 60 significant strikes landed. He'll pump out a left jab. He kind of works it to move in and out and try and set up his offense behind it, or just simply deter his opponent from settling in. Now, when he fought Christos Giagos early in that fight, he was struggling with the aggression of his opponent until he was able to score that big throw takedown and put him on the mat and kind of take it into his world. He did open up his hands a little bit in that fight, but he was also getting tagged with some big shots. As I said, he was also taken down multiple times by Khabilov from the clinch, and while he was able to, fend it off at times, he was being put on his back. He was losing the positional battles on the mat, really struggling with the strength, and I didn't like the way he was turtling up and kind of giving up his back. Anytime they went down, he was on his knees, he was kind of stuck in a position where he just kind of covered up, and Khabilov was able to hold him with an overhook around his body and wail away with shots, and Wade didn't seem to have an answer. He wasn't rolling, trying to get out of there. It just did not look good. Overall in this fight, Makhachev's striking is flawed, but he certainly has power, and I believe his work rate is vastly superior to Wade. His aggression, is going to push Wade. Obviously, it leaves defensive gaps, and that's something Wade could certainly look to capitalize on, land that big shot, and knock him out. But we haven't seen that big power from him for the most part, other than the Khabilov knockdown. Wade needs to land takedowns to make his offensive effective. His opponent, if they can defend those takedowns or even put Wade on his back, he struggles. Especially if like with the Khabilov fight, we saw him get his back taken. That was something Islam's going to look to do. That's something Wade struggles with. I think Islam's going to outwork him on the feet. He's going to keep him backing up. He's going to find success with his takedowns. He's going to shut down Wade's takedowns. And my prediction is Islam Makhachev to defeat Chris Wade by decision. And again, another very closely lined fight. We're looking at these, and it's one of those cards where you don't have a ton of big names that jump off the page at you, but what you have is stylistic matchups that really go well together. And you look at this, you go, God, this is a tough fight to call because you don't know, where does each man have the edge? And what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with a welterweight matchup as Roan Carneiro, 20 wins and 10 losses, takes on Kenny Robertson with a record of 15 wins and 3 defeats. Now, Carneiro is actually returning to welterweight after a brief stint in the UFC as a middleweight. Last time he was at welterweight, he won the Battleground one-night tournament. I believe he fought 3 times, beating Brock Larson in the final, and it was at 170 pounds. For Robertson, he returns to action after a 14-month layoff. His most recent fight was a very disappointing loss, split decision loss to Ben Saunders. I had Robertson in that matchup. I felt he did enough to win that fight, and he was robbed, or at least got a raw deal with the decision. The only other loss he's had in recent memory was a controversial loss to Sean Pearson, where he had Pearson rocked. It was one of those fights that he came very close to finishing it, and then some people saw it as a draw, other people thought he did enough, and then Pearson ultimately got, I think it was a majority decision. He does have 4 solid UFC wins in that span, though. For Carneiro, as a former middleweight, more natural welterweight, if you're asking me. That's where he fought in his first UFC stint. 1 inch taller, they'll have the same 74-inch reach. Robertson is the younger man by 6 years. Carneiro has 11 more fights as far as experience is concerned. Now, the Brazilian BJ black belt, 2 wins by knockout, 10 wins by submission, 8-3 on the scorecards. Now, he does have 3 losses by knockout and 4 losses by submission. That's 7 finishes, which is certainly concerning. And he went 2-3 during his first UFC run, so not a bad record. Certainly, we've seen a lot worse, but not great. Robertson, NCAA Division I wrestler, 7 knockouts, 6-0 fights ended by submission, 2-3 on the scorecards. That's where he's had his most trouble. He has a one TKO loss, which came to Mike Pierce early in his UFC run. For Carneiro, 15 takedowns during his first UFC stint. So he had a lot. He put John Fitch on his back a couple times. He had a lot of success putting fighters on his back. He will both shoot or work the body lock takedown, so he's very versed in that situation. Now, we've seen him at times, though, struggle getting guys to the ground when he comes in wild with his strikes and doesn't really stay technical and focus on technique and looking to overwhelm. We saw him in his last fight against Erik Brunson, where Brunson basically, during exchange, was able to get him to the mat and just unloaded and eventually knocked him out cold, but was overwhelming him with strikes on the mat. He pretty much leading up to that, Carneiro offered almost nothing on the feet. It was a very tepid pace. And then, boom, he opened up, got put on the ground, and that was it. He does tend to swing a little bit wild when he's under attack and open up. But at the same time, it can be effective. He landed a short right hand that dropped Mark Munoz, which ultimately led to him getting that rear naked choke for the finish, which was very impressive. And again, he's a solid veteran. He knows what to do in there. As long as he has time to set up, he can be very effective. Now, for Robertson, very good submission game. Strong wrestling game. Most of his UFC losses have come against superior wrestlers who could both defend his takedowns and put him on the mat. When he fought Ildemar Alcantara, he was able to put him down early, spent a lot of time on top control. He landed some nice body lock takedowns in that fight, showed very strong hips, reversing, putting him on the floor, and just forcing his opponent. Alcantara fought at middleweight, he fought at light heavyweight, so he's a big man. Robertson was able to bully him around in that matchup. He does a good job punching and closing the distance behind his strikes. Similar fashion, he took Sultan Aliyev down, who's also a fighter who fought above welterweight, so it shows how strong Kenny Robertson is. When he fought Ben Saunders, and again, once he got in top position, putting Ben Saunders on the mat, he did a very good job of fending off those submission attempts early to hold that position, land some good ground and pound, does a nice job of mixing up his ground strikes. We'll go to the head, we'll go to the body, we'll land elbows, keeps very active, constantly looking to advance and pass through his opponent's guard, and that's one thing I like about his top position game. Now, his striking, it's still a work in progress, but he has some power. He hits very hard. He will throw in hard, straight, fairly straight punches, some low kicks. He'll use a left jab to gauge the distance. He landed a massive left hook after a kick that Sultan Aliyev used, and it knocked him out cold. Also, outside of the UFC, he knocked out Lucio Linares with a beautiful spinning back fist. Put him down and just knocked him out cold. And Linares actually fought at middleweight as well. That fight might have taken place at middleweight now that I think about it. He is going to sit and trade, bites down on that mouthpiece, and will throw leather, exchange with the opponent, no problem there, and I would think Carneiro will oblige him at times there. He dropped Sanders with a right hand, he unloaded with some punches along the cage, nearly finished him in that fight. I think overall in this matchup, the grappling of these two fighters could cancel each other out. I think Robertson has a little more pop in his hands. I think he's also more durable overall, obviously being younger as well, that helps as well. I think Roan, that's a big question mark, that durability factor there. If he gets into a scrap, how will he hold up? I think Robertson brawls with him, might score a couple of takedowns, eventually catches Roan in an exchange, and eventually knocks him out. My prediction is Kenny Robertson to defeat Roan Carneiro by TKO. Fight number 4 in the main card takes place in the UFC's lightweight division as the 15th ranked Evan Dunham, 16 wins and 6 losses, takes on the debuting and late notice injury replacement, former World Series of Fighting featherweight champion Rick the Gladiator Glenn with a current record of 18 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. Now, I say Glenn is replacing Abel Trujillo on a little less than 2 weeks' notice to get into this fight, and there's all this talk about him. He was the World Series of Fighting champion, lost the belt, and then opted to not re-sign with the World Series of Fighting, expecting to get a call from the UFC. Went out, fought some regional fights, wasn't getting the call, and now getting his opportunity. So he'll be looking to make the most of this opportunity. He is stepping in on approximately 2 weeks' notice, as I said. He is 2-0 in 2016 and fought as recently as June. Now for Dunham, he's riding a 3-fight winning streak. He has some solid wins in that span over both Joe Lozon and Ross Pearson. He's kind of recaptured some of the momentum he had earlier in his career. As I said, Glenn is the former World Series of Fighting champion. Featherweight champ. He's coming up a win over former UFC fighter Ramiro Hernandez, which he was kind of underwhelming in the octagon. He also, of course, beat Georgi Karahanyan to win the title at the World Series at WSOF, and he has a very early career victory over Johnny Case. Glenn, big featherweight, 6 feet tall. Obviously, he loses a little bit of that edge coming into lightweight, but he'll still be 2 inches taller than Dunham. He'll have a 3-inch reach advantage, and he is 8 years younger. Now for Dunham, 3-2 in fights ended by knockout, 6-1 in submissions, 8-3 in the scorecards. For Glenn, 10 wins by knockout. So you see right there, he's got some pop in his hands. 5 submission wins, 3-1 in the scorecards. He does have a pair of losses by submission, including his title loss to Lance Palmer. Now, Glenn, he's got as I said, he's got a nice spread out record, very capable finisher. He can do it on the ground, he can do it on the feet. It's capable of doing it just about anywhere. What I've seen, though, in his fights against Palmer and against Ramiro Hernandez, which is available on Fight Pass, not a ton of offensive output at times. He doesn't work at an overwhelming pace, looking to pick his spots, but at times that can just let your opponent be busier than you. Lots of single strikes. He will apply pressure, cut off the cage effectively, but again, he needs to let his hands go. He throws some decent kicks. At times it seems like they're just there to be like, yeah, here's a kick. I'm not looking to hurt you. I'm looking to gauge the distance, touch you, let you know I'm here, but I'm not going to try and bury your, my foot into your midsection and finish the fight. He has some decent power in his left hand that appears to be his primary weapon for putting guys down. When he fought Palmer, he got cracked with a big left hand. He was getting hurt with some uppercuts as well before getting eventually submitted and put away. He was also taken down with relative ease in that fight and struggled at times on the mat against Palmer. Now looking at Evan Dunham, the first thing that comes to mind with Dunham is he's really picked up the pace as far as his striking is concerned. 5.37 strikes landed per minute, 127 against Joe Lozon, 152 against Rodrigo Dam. And if you go back to the TJ Grant fight, which is a fight he lost but very entertaining, he landed 160. He is a high-volume striker with some decent pop despite only having 3 wins by knockout. He likes to step into that pocket and let his hands go. He does a nice job, though, of moving his head off the center when attacking. That makes him very effective because I'm hitting you, you're not hitting me, at least not hitting me square. The other thing I like with Dunham is he's very good at punching around his opponent's guard. And Lozon was trying to shell up and absorb shots with his forearms, with his biceps, and Dunham was plugging him around his, he was working hooks around to the sides and coming up with an uppercut underneath and really finding success. Very crisp. He'll finish his combinations with a leg kick as well, which I really like when you finish that off. It's kind of like exclamation mark. It's like bang, bang, and then boom, for good measure. While you're covering up, I'm going to tag you here. Additionally, Dunham has very good grappling. He sets up his shot nice with his strikes, very good at dragging his opponent to the mat, break them down with his transition game and strikes, very active on the floor. He will look for submissions or simply sit there and land strikes. He landed 5 takedowns in his upset win over Ross Pearson. You're welcome. And he landed 3 against RDA before he went on to bigger and better things in a controversial fight that many people felt Dos Anjos had won. The way I look at this here, Dunham appears to have superior striking offensively. The power advantage probably goes to Glenn, but the work rate for Dunham and just the overall aggression certainly is going to be a difference for him on the feet. Better defensive and offensive wrestling for Dunham. I think that's a big factor here. I think he'll be able to put Glenn down if he wants to. His cardio will also be superior. Dunham is willing to take a shot to land one, and he can be hurt. We've seen him get knocked out. We've seen him get hurt in fights. He will bleed and show damage, which in a decision, a close fight, can certainly sway the judges. If you're bleeding like a stuck pig and your opponent is not, that can hurt you. But I think Dunham's going to have some success breaking him down on the feet. He's going to overwhelm him there. He's going to work his takedown game, get on the mat, and eventually work himself to a superior position. And my prediction is Evan Dunham to defeat Rick Glenn by submission. In the main event of the co-main event of the evening, jumping the gun here a little bit, we headed the UFC's middleweight division for the 9th-ranked prime-time Uriah Hall, 13 wins and 6 losses. He's taken on the 10th-ranked Derek Brunson with a record of 15 wins and 3 defeats. Now, Hall is coming off a loss to Robert Whittaker, which was then followed by his fight with Anderson Silva that fell through and Silva had to pull out, and he's kind of lost a lot of that momentum that he had built from knocking out Gegard Mousasi in a darn impressive way. He had won 5 of 6 prior to the Whittaker matchup. For Brunson, he's won 4 in a row coming into this. He scored 3 straight TKO victories. He is 6-1 in the UFC overall, and he had been scheduled to face Mousasi as well at UFC 200, but he had to pull out himself. So he's looking to continue his momentum. Brunson is 1 inch taller. Hall has a 2-inch reach advantage. I believe they are the same age. Now for Hall, he has that nice variety of strikes, but he tends to deploy them as single strikes with not a lot of setup, and it diminishes their effectiveness. Obviously, he's capable of hitting that one-hitter quitter, but if fighters can see them coming, or he doesn't set them up, it makes them much easier to defend against. And I've said this multiple times, he has that flash over functionality. Sometimes just working some simplistic but effective and consistent striking over that big turning side kick or that big jumping front kick, something like that, it's more effective, and it works in the eyes of the judges, especially if those big flashy maneuvers aren't landing. We did see, though, like against Mousasi, against Adam Sell on the show, those unorthodox techniques, they can be effective, they can catch guys off guard, and they can finish fights. Uriah has very good timing on his strikes. He's able to anticipate opponent's offense at times and move away, but again, he lacks output overall. He tends to freeze up at times. He'll often look for that perfect shot, and if it's not there, he won't take it, doesn't pull the trigger, and that allows his opponents and strikers that aren't as good as him, aren't as talented, to outwork him and get the better of him on the feet. Additionally, we've seen him have issues with takedowns. Rafael Natal, Kelvin Gastelum, and also John Howard all offered threats of takedowns, and even Mousasi as well, and that forced Hall to hesitate. It forced him to be concerned with being put on his feet. Can he open up without being put on the mat? Taken off his feet, sorry. His takedown defense has been a bit of a question mark. He's given up 8 takedowns in his UFC career. He spent a lot of time in the opening round on the mat against Mousasi. He did attack off his back, but he ultimately lost the round because of the position. Overall, he's 2-5 in decisions. That's also a concerning number. He has lost 3 split decisions in his career, which, that's tough. And in 2 of those split decisions, he was a plus 21 in the striking scenarios. All 3 of those fights have involved takedowns as well, where he's given them up. And it's just sometimes his lack of activity, it takes away from those big moments if he doesn't have enough of them. Now, looking at Derek Brunson, he has developed himself a scary, or at least very dangerous, striking attack to complement what was a pretty solid wrestling game. He's a southpaw striker, which can throw a lot of guys off as well. As I said, he's developing that power and finishing instinct. He's coming into this fight, as I mentioned previously, with 3 straight TKO finishes. He also had that fight against, I believe it was Trey Houston. He rocked him with a head kick and submitted him shortly thereafter. We've also seen him, as I said, he's a solid wrestling game. He landed 8 takedowns in his decision wins over Chris Lieben and Lorenz Larkin. He had 3 against Yoel Romero, an Olympic wrestler, in a fight that he was winning before getting stopped late. But against Ed Herman and Sam Alvey, it was all systems go, and against Carneiro as well, knocking them out early on in those fights. He throws a huge left hand, which he was able to hurt Sam Alvey and eventually knock him out with. He did it at close range along the cage, where he was bullying him, having a lot of success closing the distance there. What Brunson does do, and at times can be very ineffective, is he overextends himself when he attacks. He overcommits on strikes. He leaves his chin up and out and exposed. He doesn't do it nearly as much as he used to. But it's still something to be concerned about. We saw him get knocked out by Jacare Souza back in Strikeforce because of that fact. When he fought Sam Alvey, he got really wild once he got him hurt and went for the finish. Put him down, absolutely finished him. But it leaves him open to being countered, and it leaves him open to getting exhausted and wearing himself out. In similar fashion against Carneiro, he got on the mat, he unloaded with this massive barrage, and for a while Carneiro was shelling up and blocking it, and Brunson eventually got through and finished him, knocked him out cold on the mat. But had he not been able to do that, the question is, how could he have continued and been nearly as effective had he punched himself out, if you will? When you look at this matchup, I think the work rate and wrestling both favor Derek Brunson, but his chin and cardio certainly aren't perfect. And if he is unable to maintain that pace in the second half of round 2 and round 3, Uriah Hall's speed could become a factor where he's able to land big strikes and knock him out. But for the most part, I think Uriah Hall needs a knockout. I don't think he can outpoint Erik Brunson, who is just simply too aggressive on the feet, and the takedown is going to be a major factor. If Brunson, like we saw against Lorenz Larkin, if he opts to go for a takedown heavy attack, Uriah Hall has to find an answer for that, and it's not going to be sitting there looking to set up one or two big kicks. It's going to be, go conventional, set up your strikes, set up your big power punches properly, and quantity over quality at times is important. I think Brunson's going to work his wrestling. It's going to take away Hall's striking game. I think that's ultimately what he's going to look at here. He's going to avoid that big moment where Hall's able to set something up and knock him out. And my prediction is Erik Brunson to defeat Uriah Hall by decision. And finally now we move to the co-main event of the evening in the lightweight division as the 7th-ranked Dustin the Diamond Poirier, 20 wins and 4 losses, takes on the 10th-ranked Michael the Menace Johnson with a current record of 17 wins and 10 defeats. Now, it's a big fight for both, and I always say that, but most fights are big for both individuals. There's nobody comes in and goes, this is a garbage fight for me. I don't care if I win or lose. These are always big fights, but it's still worth saying. Poirier, for his position, is looking to continue his climb up the ranks. For Johnson, he needs to restart his ascent to title contention because he's had a bit of a setback here. Poirier has won 4 consecutive fights since coming to lightweight and stopping his cut to featherweight. 3 of those wins coming by knockout. He only has 1 loss in his last 8 fights, which came against Conor McGregor, and in that span, he has 5 wins by knockout. For Johnson, he's coming to this fight off back-to-back losses. A bit of a questionable loss against Benito Dariush, which I had Dariush in that fight, and I thought Johnson took the decision, but the more I look at it and the more I watch it, I could see a better argument for Dariush than I did before. He had won 4 in a row leading up to his current 2-fight mini slump, and that 4 wins were preceded by 2 losses as well. So it's not like he's has been all sunshine and giggles for Michael Johnson. He's had his down moments and he's had his up moments. Both guys have significant power. MJ's got 7 wins by knockout. Poirier's got 10. Poirier has 6 submission victories, which is worth noting. Why? Because Michael Johnson has 6 losses by submission, which tells us he is vulnerable on the mat if it does get there. Michael Johnson, 1 inch taller. He'll have a 1 inch reach advantage. The Diamond is the younger man by 3 years. Now, both fighters are very aggressive strikers. Poirier does have, on average, lands about 1 strike more per minute, and both give up over 3 strikes per minute to their opponents. But Michael Johnson, not quite half a strike more defensively is what he gives up. So both an edge in both categories to Dustin Poirier, which certainly can show up over a 5-round fight. Now for Dustin, when he's striking, he will throw some long strikes from range. He keeps a decent pace. His chin can be a bit of a question mark. We've seen him buzzed in a couple of fights in addition to getting knocked out by Conor McGregor. He has a very solid kicking game, good power overall. We saw him go to his wrestling in the Joseph Duffy fight when he was struggling a little bit on the feet, which is, it's great. He had that ability to change gears and was very effective at doing it. When he is on the feet, he throws a nice counter right hand. He throws a long right jab as well. He'll work a straight punch to the body. He'll throw some hard low kicks. We saw him rock Bobby Green with a left hand. Right jab will also come in. He threw that he threw a right jab and long left cross, which is very effectively set in there. It just seemed like Green was setting himself up for it. He kind of stands upright, and Poirier tagged him and eventually put him down, which was very impressive. Overall, he's shown himself to be very accurate when he's striking, especially when he's unloading it in close range. He'll pick his shots, but he's certainly not the type of guy who's going to hold back if the opportunity presents itself. He moves his head very well as well when he is striking. Now, he has a decent wrestling game, likes to push his opponent into the cage. He'll change levels, does a good job of pulling out his opponent's base. He has good ground and pound. He'll work away. He does a nice job of going to both the head and body and forcing his opponent to move his defense in order to cover up. And, that's something he might look against Michael Johnson, who's had some issues with being put on his back. Now for MJ, he's very aggressive on the feet. He's a pressure-based striker at times, and he's got some decent volume. He landed 116 strikes against Joe Lozon, and he landed 103 against Nate Diaz in that fight. He has a decent wrestling game. He tends to use it in reverse to stay vertical. A lot of the fights he's had success, staying vertical, but at times in the Miles Jury fight and the Reza Madadi fight come to mind, he has had issues getting put on his back. He has some pretty good footwork. He'll use a lot of lateral movement, pretty quick, long right jab. He'll go to the body as well. Decent kicks. We saw him use that a lot against the Nate Diaz, especially early on. And, once he gets his opponent back to the cage, he will open up and throw. Again, his chin, also a bit of a question mark. We saw him drop by Danny Castillo. He's been hurt before. Also, he throws his punches, especially when he gets to the inside. He gets out of that, it's not clinch fighting, but it's certainly still closer range fighting. He tends to, I don't know, it's the way he throws his punches. He kind of comes with a wide left hook and follows it with kind of wide overhand right as well. Again, very aggressive, and he lets his hands go. It was effective against Edson Barboza, where he was constantly pressuring him, and he was it did a good job there. But against an accurate striker who's very good with countering and throwing hands down the middle, that can be something he can, they could capitalize. As he tends to leave himself open a little defensively in that. He will reach at times with his strikes, and he doesn't always connect, which leaves him overextended and vulnerable to a counter strike. The difference in the Nate Diaz fight with Michael Johnson was when Nate started to pop him with his jab. It was breaking up MJ's rhythm. It hurt him a couple of times. Nate was having success popping with the left jab and then following with that right hand and started, boom, just simple 1-2s, and bang, bang, Johnson was in trouble. Additionally, we've seen his output drop off in fights. The second half of that fight against Beneil Dariush is when it started to turn against him, and he just wasn't throwing enough, or what he was throwing, he wasn't landing it. And again, in that fight, Dariush, where he found success, popping him with that jab. Short, crisp, right down the middle. Bang, bang, bang. Not a lot. When I say short, I don't mean just a short. I'm saying short as in just boom, right to the target. Not a big wind up, nothing fancy, just right to the target and land it quickly. Some of the issues with Johnson, he's had issues with his cardio. He's had issues, obviously, with his submission defense. He's been out-wrestled in fights, they already mentioned. He's been hurt in fights. Those are certainly things to be concerned with. Both fighters in this matchup are southpaw, which is usually an advantage they have over their opponent because it gives them a different look, and their opponent is not used to dealing with that southpaw front. So that's something worth noting here, is neither one of those guys will have that specific advantage. Poirier tends to fight better on the inside. Shorter, crisper strikes, quicker to the target. Not as much wind-up or extension. He's able to get his hands back at a ready position to let his hands go. The jab has been the ultimate undoing of the menace, Michael Johnson, and I think Poirier is going to use it both to disrupt his rhythm, he's going to use it to do damage, and he's going to use it to set up power strikes as well. Especially when we saw it against Johnson. Use that jab to set up the big power coming behind it. I think Dustin's cardio overall is better. I think he'll maintain his pace better. This is a 5-round fight. And you got to keep that in mind. It's a 5-round fight, and if Dustin's able to get through the first couple of rounds, look for Johnson to start to slow down. Or sorry, Poirier, I don't mean if this fight goes beyond the first 2 rounds, look for Johnson to start to slow down. I'm not saying Poirier has no chance of getting through the first 2 rounds. But I think as the fight slows down, you're going to see Poirier land more. That fact that he's not making as big a cut to get down to 155, he should have a speed advantage. Those are all factors that favor Dustin Poirier. I think he lands something. I think he hurts Michael Johnson. And my prediction is Dustin Poirier to defeat Michael Johnson by knockout. So those are my 6 main card predictions for UFC Fight Night 94. All of my preliminary predictions, as always, available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. The bet packs we posted there as well with my full fantasy analysis and betting analysis of all the fights in the card, telling you, yes, bet this one, no, don't bet this fight. None of this crap where it's like, here, pay $50 and I'll show you 2 fights I want you to bet on that are garbage. But, yeah, I do my best. Obviously, I lose some. We're looking to win here. There's a lot of closely lined fights on this card, and the prelims are the same. There's some tough fights to pick, which obviously means if we get them right, the money is going to be there. That's all we can do. Keep pumping away. There's been a ton of UFC action. There's one more fight after this, UFC Fight Night 95, and then we get a bit of a break. October looks slow, which, hey, I'm an MMA fan, but I don't mind the break once in a while, so I'm looking forward to that a little bit. And, yeah, I got the prelims coming up. I'll get on those as quickly as possible, and we will go from there. Thanks for tuning in. Follow me at Twitter, KO_predictions. Check me out on Facebook as well. Always join the group there. I try and post as much stuff as possible. Usually if you're on my Facebook group, you'll get updates as soon as I've got stuff posted. Boom, I'll put it on Facebook there. And thanks, guys, for tuning in. As always, I appreciate all the comments and everything else and the viewership. And take care. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.